Okay, so let's try this again. All right. So that's the first thing, is this is where you're going to go to get access to the class recordings. Get that out of the way. Okay, and it was brought to my attention that there was an error in the grade calculator over the weekend. And so what was happening is Perusal was sending one score, but Moodle was expecting a different score, which caused some errors in the grade calculation. So those have been resolved and taken care of. I am happy to say that I believe they all resolved in your favor. So that's always a good thing. All right, so that leads us to the second point of the day. So I was sitting in my office feeling all kinds of cocky this morning, thinking, man, I've got everything ready to go. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling great. And I walk into class and I pull up the screen, and guess what I discover? What was the reading assignment for class today? Does anybody remember?
Chapter 2.
Yeah, it was chapter 2 through 2.4 in our introduction to ethical values, which is great. It was a good reading. Everybody participated well. Guess what's missing from the class list today? The questions for the reading for today. The reading, or the questions, are totally prepared for chapter 1, which we will have for Thursday. And so how many of you sat there looking at the student questions going, where am I? Okay, so that is on me. I apologize that I did not realize that until it was, of course, too late to be able to post anything of significance or meaning or help for our comments for today. So that leaves me in a bit of a quandary, because part of the entire activity, part of this class, is designed on that I'm supposed to be able to ask you questions and you get credit for attendance with a list of questions that do not align. So I have a couple of ideas in my head. I would first, however, like to open it up for class discussion. Does anybody have any ideas about how you think we should proceed for today? How can I assess learning because again, I have a couple of priorities. I hate putting people on the spot.
There was number 17 seems like it could relate to not only chapter 1, but pretty much everything we've learned. It's the employees considered whether a company is ethical when selecting potential employers. And I think the whole class kind of discussed that one, because there seems to be a lot of avenues that could go.
Okay. I'll be honest with you, Sam, I heard you talking, but I couldn't clearly understand what you were saying. So I think you were saying something along the lines that chapter 1 questions still apply, or?
On 17, can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yeah, at 17, employees consider whether a company is ethical when selecting potential employers. I think even with the chapter 2 and what we've learned up to now, that's still pretty open-ended. And I think the whole class could kind of discuss that one.
Okay, so we could just basically say, okay, as long as everybody contributes something that you commented on or something you found interesting in the reading, I can still give credit that way. Okay, other ideas?
So there was another reading below that one?
There is.
And I pretty much did all my questions from that one.
Right. I just did, because that's Thursday's reading, I don't want to get into that one,
Okay.
Because logically speaking, if you looked at it, you would normally assume, well, that must be our Thursday reading, so I'm going to read that for Thursday. I don't want to penalize anybody for my screw up, and I have to take responsibility. And I will be honest, my initial response is, because this was my fault, I cannot penalize you, so my initial reaction is everybody automatically gets credit for attendance today. And I have no qualms or problems with that.
I like that.
I think that's the only fair solution.
Hey, Mr. Lambert, I have a question.
Yes.
So I see chapter 1 student list, and so I
Yes.
clicked on, and I was like looking at those questions, how it's the 1 through 32, and I was finding those answers in the Believe chapter 2 through, okay, well, I found one of my answers in like chapter 2.6 or something, but so what was that?
That was supposed to, that is the reading for class on Thursday. So the chapter 1 student list, that's the list of questions that applies to chapter 1 that we're going to read for Thursday.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So I've got to take responsibility for that, so that one's on me. And one of my priorities in this class is that I never want to do something where my screw up negatively affects your grade. That's not fair. I leave more than enough room for you guys to screw up on your own that I don't need to penalize you more. So I will get that taken care of after class today. But my biggest focus is what can we do with the next about an hour that is not going to be a waste of time for you since I failed to do my job and prepare correctly.
I mean, we could discuss the key points of 2 to 2.4.
I think that is going to be kind of what I would like to do. So kind of here's what I'm thinking about doing is I will keep track of who volunteers and participates. Okay, and those will qualify for extra credit for today. Okay, one thing that I also figured out, because I used to tell everybody, if I go and put a check mark next to your name and I upvote, you get credit for the reading and you get credit for attendance. But I realized it's very hard because it doesn't tell you who upvoted. It tells you if I upvoted, but it's kind of hard to find. So what I'm going to start doing, and I did it on the reading today. Give me just a second. Minimize this. Okay, is over here on the far right-hand side, you'll see, look at a specific conversation, look at all of the conversations. And if you look at number 3, it's got that star. That is a much easier way for me to indicate so that you can track who got the attendance comments. So that's what I'm going to do from now. It'll make it a little bit easier for everybody to find that. Okay, is everyone cool with that? Okay, so let's come back to the reading. And just because we've got a group of people in class and a group of people online, if you're going to comment, make sure that you tell me your name, because I haven't gotten to figure out voices yet. And masks kind of screw up my entire facial recognition software. Okay, so let's begin by talking about the word ethics. And what I thought was interesting was the book basically said that this concept comes from what? 2 different words. Comes from the word economy, right? Well, one of them is economy. Oikos and ethos. So let's start there. Let's talk about what the author was trying to talk about with this. Would anybody like to start? Okay. Okay. Which one is talking about character? You got a 50-50 chance. One's a yogurt flavor or a yogurt manufacturer. And the other is your character or your spirit. Which one do you want to guess for? Oikos is the word yogurt. Ethos is that idea of character or spirit. Okay? But they say that the word economy comes from, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce these words because I can barely speak English, let alone breathe. Okay, but they're talking about this idea of economy, right? And so what do they mean when they talk about economy?
A mutual relationship.
Okay, and that was Haley?
Yeah.
Okay.
It gives the example of someone managing their household and trying to find the best ways to look after that household.
Okay. And so one of the interesting things that the author kind of suggests is that idea of household management can be both physical, meaning what? What would physical management of the household look like?
I mean, cleaning up, housekeeping, doing things that are gonna benefit.
Paying the bills.
Paying the bills, chopping wood, prepping food, anything that is, all of the things necessary to keep the members of the household safe and healthy. Okay, remind me? Kyle. And somebody else hopped in online, but I couldn't.
I only said one thing, so you don't really have to count it.
Okay, I'll cut back to you. That was Anthony, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I got some folks popping up on chat, so I am. Let's see. Oh, that's the chat from last time. So it's got cool. We're going to have an ongoing chat. So that's all semester long, I guess that chat is good. So I'm going to have somebody just keep an eye on that. So if anything pops up there, let me know. Okay, so so first of all, we're getting at this idea of economy, meaning taking care of the household physically. But then the author introduces there's another concept to taking care of the household. What was this other interpretation? What household were they talking about?
And it's talking more larger scale, right? Like as far as benefits everybody, and this is our home, like philosophically, I guess.
Okay, so we're talking about in the first case, a physical concept of caring for the home. But in the second, this idea of ethos, it means the house as part of what? A bigger community. So how would we take care of our household as part of a community? And is it?
Winter.
Winter, okay.
So in like a physical sense, like being involved with like your neighbors and like having good relationships with those people who live around you.
Okay. Yeah, it's this idea of being good neighbors, which at its most fundamental means we have to know who our neighbors are, right? Now I'm going to get on a bit of a soapbox here. It's probably a skill we've lost to a degree, right? We can say that Facebook has replaced it, but yeah, not so much. So why would it be so important to have this concept of caring for my household in view of a community? Why would that be so important? William, okay.
Basically like what you were saying, you're just trying to care for, like when you're trying to care for your house, you want to keep everyone safe and healthy.
Okay.
And if you're living in or involved in a larger society that's safe and that's a healthy society, then it's going to benefit you and your close family.
Okay, but I can only do that if I get to know who those people are. Because then I can start to understand them and we can come to agreements. For example, garage band should not be playing at 2 o'clock in the morning. If everybody in the neighborhood agrees to that rule, then everybody gets a good night's sleep, which makes people friendlier to each other, right? And so one of the things the textbook says is that this concept of ethics precedes cities, right? That we see evidence of discussions of ethics that are 4,000, about 4,000 years old, right? Some of the earliest writing we have is things that establish common rules to manage society. Okay, well, that sounds fine for a legal system, but what's the difference then between laws and a legal system and ethics? You let somebody online go.
With laws, there's a direct punishment. You break the law, you go to jail, or you've done a crime. With ethics, you're making a moral choice, which isn't governed by if you're going to be punished or not, but by your values and how you feel you should act.
Okay, so one could almost say that ethics is aspirational. What do I mean when I say aspirational?
Something to strive for.
It's something we work towards, right? The legal system says this low and no further. You can do anything you want to this line. Sorry for folks online that are online, you might not be able to see this as well, but you can't go any lower than this. Because if you do, then it breaks down society and it breaks down that household management that we've been focusing on. Ethics, on the other hand, says this is what we strive for, what we work towards, and the more we work towards that, inherently what's going to happen if we aspire towards ethics. Well, okay, so let me rephrase this because I think that might have been a little bit confusing. Why does the legal system establish that baseline bottom no further than this? Kyle?
Safety.
Safety. These are the minimum rules for everybody to be okay. Anything less than this, and we're suddenly starting to lose property, physical harm, and we cannot work together as a society. So that the purpose of the legal system is to kind of create this outer boundary where anything outside of that is lawlessness or anarchy or autonomous, right? Talked about that in the reading. Ethics says if everybody moves towards these things in the center, we will become more and more connected, more and more united, because we will be working towards aspirations of how we want to or ought to interact with each other. Okay? And as you add, originally, if we think about this, originally from a sociological perspective, humans began in what? Did everybody just live together? We started out in tribes, right? Most of those tribes were related and connected. So they were essentially large households, right? And each household could create the rules that that household lived by. Okay? Now, even today, for example, I send my teenagers off to visit other people's homes, right? And what do I have to tell them before they leave? Number one, pick up after yourself. The rules at their house go. Just because you can do something here does not mean you can do it there. Actually, I tend to say, if they let you do it and we don't, then you don't do it. Whichever is the more strict rule, that's the one you follow. Right? But as these family groups, tribes and things like that started to come and collect together, we had to come up with bigger or better rules because what one household wanted to do couldn't maybe not work for another. Right? Okay.
So the legal side is trying to keep in mind the whole community. that's kind of the idea behind the legal side, isn't it? Just, even though some people will be affected, it's for the greater good.
Okay, so I would make the argument the legal system is designed as these are the absolute limits of acceptable behavior, but they do not no law establishes something that we're trying to live up to. They try to create the minimums, the boundaries of what is acceptable or not. Okay? Ethics is trying to point us in a different direction as to what do we want to do, or how do we make the best decision, especially in situations where what we're aspiring to can conflict with other things that we aspire to. The classic example that I hear is when your wife asks you, how do I look? Do you tell them the truth or do you lie? I'm lucky because I married a lady who looks great right after she finishes working out. Okay, I have yet to see her in a situation where she does not look absolutely fantastic. I might not agree with color choice, but I never have to wonder whether I'm supposed to say you look great or not. I'm lucky. Okay? But the question resides, do you tell your children the truth or do you protect their innocence? What would the two ethical aspirations be that are conflicting in that situation?
If you tell them the truth, then they are knowing more and they are, I guess you could say, maturing. But if you protect their innocence, it's like it's the ignorance is bliss.
Okay, so on the one hand, I have the aspiration of telling the truth, which is always a good policy, right? Because if I'm honest, that's a trait that everybody wants, right? Being honest makes sure society works. When the more truth we have, the better things are. So how could I possibly justify lying to a child? Why would lying be an ethically acceptable situation?
I think it's all circumstantial when it comes to kids because adult issues should stay adult issues and they shouldn't be brought for a kid to have to carry.
Okay, so
I disagree with that.
Okay.
I mean, in the book To Kill a Mockingbird, the dad is a lawyer, and he was telling his young children about rape and other adult and legal such. And so I think it just depends on the parent themselves and the circumstance.
Right, it's circumstantial.
Yeah.
Well, and so the thing is we've got a circumstance where, for example, my level of concern or care for that person and the injury that might occur to them if I were to tell them the truth, right, can be such that the lie is less painful or less damaging to them than the truth is.
I think this is also one of those, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Like if a kid is learning an instrument and they're like, I'm bad at this instrument, of course you're going to say, yeah, because everybody's pretty bad when they start. But instead of saying, yes, you suck, you could be like, well, you're getting better. And so essentially you haven't lied to them, but you didn't also like crush them or put the fear that they're not going to get better in them either. If that makes sense.
So the idea is that we're always looking for what is the best possible alternative, the one that is the most beneficial. And so if we go back to that thing that we read last week, they gave us a list of at least 5 different approaches that we can use that help us to determine how to act or how to address those relative concerns, right? How do I address if I have this on this hand and this on the other hand, and I'm trying to figure out which one to go with, and they both suck? How do I decide which one to do? Okay, that's what we're talking about here. And why do we do this? Because we're trying to manage our place, our household within a society. Okay? Okay, we're going to scroll down here just a little bit. Okay. Now, if we notice, if we look at this paragraph right up here, and I do apologize, by the way, that the textbook, this free textbook that we had embedded ads. I have zero control over those, and if I tried to delete them, it totally just made the book a mess. But I can understand how some people are going, well, am I supposed to annotate the ads? So anyway, but if we look at this and it says, we already know that thinking and action were originally driven by customs or customary law. So righteous or wrongful behavior was assessed according to how society stuck to certain rules. Aristotle noticed that these moral regulations are twofold. In Greek, it's all Greek to me. In English, it means they can be written or unwritten. Moral code is inseparable from every culture and typical of every era of human existence. So what does that mean?
I think
This section that's highlighted right up at the top of the screen.
I think it's saying that, like, no matter what era you go into, morals are always going to be there because every person has an internal moral compass of right and wrong.
Okay. Now, what do you think Aristotle means when he says that they can be written and unwritten?
Because values change.
Values can change.
Different cultures are just gonna have different ethics, too, different principles they want to strive for.
Okay. Now, the truth is that they're going to have different moral codes. Does that mean they have different ethics?
Probably.
So what's the difference again?
Ethics is like what you ought to do versus what you want to do. Morals is just like what you're raised to believe, kind of. Is that, I don't know if that's what it's effective.
Yeah, not exactly. Morals is what we believe to be right or wrong. And that what we consider to be right or wrong, can that change from society to society, from culture to culture? Yes. However, how we operate on that belief, the way that we apply it, the way that we judge it, does that change? That's the difference between morals and ethics. Morals is what we believe we should do. Ethics is how we ought to do it. So if I get back to, hold on, let me think of who just said this. Sam, you were the one that was saying, for example, if I have to tell somebody the truth, the way that I do it is important.
Right.
Was that you?
Yeah.
Okay. So this idea of, I can tell somebody that they play horribly, but the way I say it, okay, I'm fulfilling my obligation to be honest, but I can do so in a way that doesn't, okay, debating whether I want to disclose this or not. Okay, I love to play Dungeons and Dragons. I apologize if that lowers my, some of you are going, yeah, I can see that. I do it because it's something that I can connect with my son with, okay? But in Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm gonna apologize for my French, there is something called Rule 0. And this was made famous by a geek icon named Will Wheaton, who said, the #1 rule of Dungeons and Dragons is don't be a dick. That is the #1 rule. You can do whatever you want, but just don't be a jerk when you do it. Right? I think if we were to sum up the entire class, that's what the number one rule of ethics is. There's a lot of things we can do, but we shouldn't be a jerk when we do it. Okay? So getting back to this idea of morals and moral codes, that they can be written and unwritten, means that we can evolve. That what is right now does not necessarily have to be what it is in the future. For centuries, it was considered moral to own property, human property. In the Constitution of the United States, this document that we say is the most powerful and transformative document in the history of the world in terms of freedom and capacity, we know that when it was first written, there was something in it called the 3/5 Compromise. Anybody know what the 3/5 Compromise was?
Yeah, it's owner, when someone had it's how they worked around giving slave owners more voting rights per person.
So it was this idea that, well, slaves are there and they're human beings, and therefore owners should get credit for that, but we don't want to give them too much credit. So we will say that an individual who was a slave was counted as 3/5 of a person in terms of determining population. Why would that matter in the Constitution? Why would population matter?
Well, it's still a community. You still have everyone governed under one flag or one nation. So how you make those decisions and how you put leaders in matters for everybody.
Okay, but there's something even more fundamental. In the way the Constitution was organized, we have three primary bodies of government. What are they?
Legislative.
The legislative,
Executive.
executive, and
Judicial.
okay. So if we look at two of those, the judicial and executive are represented by one group, right? The president is as the executive, and the Supreme Court is the judicial. In the legislative branch, however, we decided to do something a little funky, right? We created two, what we call a bicameral legislature. What are they? The Senate and
The
the
House.
House of Representatives. Okay, so we've got the Senate and the House of Representatives. How many senators are there now? There are 2 for every state.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, well, I didn't know.
Okay, so if there are 50 states, how many senators do we have? 100. Why did they do it that way? Why would they only have 2 senators?
Because of regardless of population, each state has equal representation.
So we have one group where every state, a small state like Rhode Island, has exactly the same amount of power as New York or California. Because they were scared little states were going to get overwhelmed by big states. So they created the Senate. On the other hand, large states said, well, wait a minute though. Why does this little tiny Rhode Island or Delaware, who has barely anybody there, have the same power as New York, which back then was a major population center? So they created a separate group called the House of Representatives. How is the House of Representatives elected? How do we determine the people in the House of Representatives?
They're divided in proportion to their total population of the state.
Exactly. So the total population in the state determines the number of representatives. This is where that 3/5 compromise came in. Didn't affect the Senate, right? The Senate was 2 per state. That's the end of it. But in the House of Representatives, Somebody like New York was gonna say, dude, we're totally rocking this. Folks in the South said, now wait a minute. There's a lot of people who live here. Not all of them can vote, but they still live here. So we should be able to get credit for that. So they came up with a 3/5 compromise. It says slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person in terms of representation for the House of Representatives. So in the core founding document of the United States, what were we acknowledging and accepting as a moral behavior? Slavery. Is that the way it is now?
No,
Why not?
because our society changed.
Society changed. Well, was it just because society changed?
It's because
values
ethics
on
and
human
morals changed.
Okay, our moral behavior changed. Okay, Haley, I think you were saying, was it Haley that was talking?
Our value of human life.
Okay, our attitudes about the value of human life changed. Did it happen overnight? No. It came over a lot of time and even into armed conflict to finally settle once and for all whether or not that mortal rule would continue. Some would argue that the Civil War was not enough to resolve that issue. Because even after the Civil War, we switched to a different set of laws.
The Jim Crow laws.
Continue to maintain that same level of control. We call them Jim Crow laws in the South. The goal was in the 1960s that we were supposed to have gotten rid of Jim Crow. People would say that happened. Other people would say, well, you got rid of those laws, but the situation still hasn't changed. Now, why does this matter? Why are we even talking about this? This is not a class on social issues. This is a class on ethics. And some of you are probably sitting here thinking, this is supposed to be business ethics. You're not supposed to be lecturing me on politics. So why are we talking about that? Well, some might say that's because you're in charge, Mr. Lambert. That's what you chose to talk about.
Deontology. Is that applicable?
What's that?
The deontology, the duty to each other.
Okay. Anybody else?
Politics are our business.
Politics affect our business. They affect everything we do. They establish, to a great degree, they establish that outside law, right? That's what politics is all about. That's where the laws come from. That's why laws continually change, right? Somebody pointed out in the comments, it used to be if you stole, they would chop off your hand or they would put you to death. Do we do that now? Okay, so laws evolve. Our goal is for our ethics also to evolve, to help us to live better according to the moral code that we establish, and for us to be able to consider the moral code that we adhere to. Okay? I got to ask a stupid question though. Remind me.
Scott,
Scott. Okay. Sorry.
very good.
Okay, I'm getting there, folks. All right. So then the book talks about the idea of, let's talk about these for a second. The concept of autonomous, heteronymous, and phenomenous. And if I mispronounce those, I apologize. Autonomous. What is the concept of autonomous?
It almost seems like a vigilante kind of thing. Like, I don't answer to anyone. I take the law to myself.
Okay, I am a law unto myself, meaning whatever I choose to do, I can do. are there examples of autonomous law or autonomous ethics today?
Kind of
Yeah?
like when the boss, oh, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was gonna say it's kind of like when the boss man says my way or the highway, and you're not gonna change. You're not gonna change my mind.
Okay.
Would,
And that gets at something called ownership, right? The
Yeah.
idea that if I own, if we call it private property, it means I can do just about anything I want to without interruption or without interference, as long as I own it.
Yeah.
Okay? And so, for example, at a private business, a boss can hire or fire at their whim because they own the property and they own the equipment. If I'm in my own home, I can do just about whatever I want. I can get as drunk as I want to. I can do as many drugs as I want to, as long as I am on private property. Now, that gets tricky because normally I have to go someplace else to procure said items. And normally it's the transportation or possession outside of a private residence that exposes me to legal hazard. But once I'm inside my own home, I have the right to talk to my kids however I want to, which is scary, right? I can treat my spouse however I want to, again, which is scary. And even that is subject to legal interpretation. But the entire concept here is we begin by talking about autonomous law. Kids tend to live under autonomous law. I do what I want. That works when they're about 2 or 3, right? Okay. Then we move into heteronymous, which means what? The law of the stranger. What does that mean?
General,
What's that?
like general law.
Okay. When we say the law of the stranger or the law of difference, what's the concept there? You say general.
Like to others, I guess.
It is a law that is imposed or a rule that is imposed by others. I'm doing something because the other, the stranger, the one who is not me, is telling me what to do. Right? So if we were to stand up and look out the window right here and look towards Reef Gym, this is crazy, but it's true. We see a little thing right there hanging over the middle of the road with flashing lights that are imposing rules upon. Think about how absolutely insane this is. We let lights tell us what to do. Why? Why do we do that? Why do we let that little flashing light tell me whether I can drive or not? I'm late.
Because it establishes some sort of order.
Because it establishes order. Because every other person who approaches that same intersection is probably late as well. And to prevent harm and hazard, we allow the stranger, which is not ourselves, to establish law to create consistency, to create order. So what does that have to do with ethics? Sounds like we're talking about law. Okay? You got to speak up. You're totally right.
That tells you what you have to do. You don't really want to do it, but you have to.
Okay?
And I brought up like drafting wars.
Yes.
A lot of people were drafting. They didn't want to go to work. They're like, you guys figured it out. But they're drafting, of course.
We were forced to because as a society, we agreed there were certain priorities that had to overcome autonomous will. The need to go to war to protect our interests was such that we had to override individual rights or individual freedoms. We made the argument that doing so was the price of having that society. In order for us to retain our identity, to adhere to the laws that we want, we would have to go against those who disagreed or wanted to break down those same laws. This is World War II, right? The perception was if we don't fight Germany and Japan, then the very lifestyle that we have, the laws and ethics we adhere to, would be subsumed by others. Okay, so just really quickly at the end, what is synonymous? If autonomous is the law of self, heteronymous is the law of the other.
The law of God.
It's the law of God. It's this idea of theology, that there are certain divine laws that supersede the laws of man or the law of self. Okay? What's the problem with that? Is there a problem with that?
There's really not a problem with it. There could be, depending on your religious beliefs, but in most religion, you still fall under the law of man as well as the law of God. And so
okay,
you have to do both.
Okay, so the challenge of synonymous law is it becomes very subject to interpretation, and how was it received? Where did it come from? And because if I believe that synonymous law or divine law supersedes the law of man, I am allowed to do whatever I need to adhere to divine law, which can create incredibly challenging problems in a society, especially a pluralistic society. What is a pluralistic society? Is there one religion in the United States?
No.
There are multiple, right? Is there one culture in the United States?
No.
No. Individuals have created and brought with them cultures from across the globe. So if all of those cultures exist and maintain some of identity of their own, we create what we call a pluralistic, meaning many cultures represented at the same time. Okay, so if multiple religious organizations and societies exist in the United States, what does that do to this concept of theonomic, I think that's the correct word, theonomic ethics?
There is no one set.
Well, each group feels like they have the set, but if they try to impose their set on everybody else, that becomes a real problem, because as soon as you try to tell me that this is what God told you, therefore I have to do it, but I believe that God told me something else, that creates incredible conflict. And especially if you attribute that to a deity or a religious source, you feel an obligation even greater than if the legal system told you, right? Because you feel like you have an obligation, which can be incredibly problematic. So, unless everybody adhere to the same thematic ethics and standards, this becomes a very difficult way to be able to establish coherent and cohesive and livable law. And so we want to make sure that we understand that, because that creates an understanding or a basis for us to understand everything else we're going to cover. Okay, let's see. So according to my list, I still need to hear from Logan, Megan, and I think Megan, you might have already shared, Jackson, Porter, and Billy. And is Caden here? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to assume. Okay, so I've got a couple more of you that need to speak up. So what I'm going to let you do is I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to find something you would like to discuss, either something you wrote or something somebody else wrote that you'd like to discuss, and then we're going to call it a day. So I want to be done at about 1:30 because I promised everybody we'd be out early today. So again, I need Logan, Megan, Jackson, Porter, Billy, and Caden to come up with something. And I'm going to let you guys decide who goes first. And please not everybody at once. Okay, Logan, on my screen, you're the first one I see, so I'm going to ask you if you'd go first.
All right, let me find something.
Okay. If anybody else has one that you'd like to jump in with, please don't hesitate. While Logan's looking, Caden or Megan, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I don't really know what you want me to talk about.
Well, it's not so much anything that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything in the reading that you covered that you thought was interesting or valuable to discuss?
Yeah, I mean, I could pull up one of my comments. I thought was there was some stuff on there that I thought was pretty cool. I got to go find him though.
Okay. Megan, what about you?
I was kind of confused too, so now I kind of understand.
Okay. Well, we'll give you about another 5 minutes.
I liked was at the bottom of the reading, and it just asked a question like, what should my values really be? And like what are the values that I currently hold on to? And I just like looked at the comments on that and I commented on that. And I think it's interesting that how we all like change our values over time and like what our parents taught us to believe. We
Okay.
I don't know, like we can figure out for ourselves if we believe that is really like a good thing to believe and constantly reevaluate how we feel about certain things and how to go about that.
Okay, so our moral code will change over time, can change over time, right? What are some of the things that are most likely to cause our moral code to change?
Just society in general. What we believe is okay back then, we'll say 70s, isn't okay now, for an example.
Okay. Okay.
Personal experience.
I think that's the biggest one. The more that we experience things, the more we come to perceive other perspectives, right? For example, I look at how I was raised and how my father treated me. And I thought about how that would apply to when I was raising kids. And he had a very specific way of doing things. Then I met my father-in-law. If you were on a spectrum, you'd have my dad on one side and you'd have my father-in-law on the exact opposite side. And now all of a sudden I had to decide which way did I want to go. There were good things about this side. There were good things about this side. So I had to start changing, right? There were some things that I didn't agree with over here. So I didn't go the way of my father-in-law. A lot of things I didn't agree with over here on the side of my dad. And so I had to come up with my own style of teaching and raising. Oh man, what a horrific blunder that was. Things you wish you could go back and do over again now that you know what you're doing. Okay? All right, thanks, Megan. Okay, Logan, Caden, you got anything for us?
Yeah.
All right, sir.
So I found a highlighted section. It was already highlighted, but I thought it was a good point. It says a logical need to find ways of acting in various areas of human coexistence that can be considered good or at least helpful in shaping of good life. Well, I thought it was a good point just because like we all want to live together in harmony, but if everyone has different values or they just don't think the same way, I guess, I don't know, different opinions, it's kind of hard to do that. But there may not be a correct way to act, but if we can all agree on certain things, then we can form a functioning society.
Hey, and one of the realities of our society it used to be that you would know the people in your town or your city, and that was about it. You might have a couple of visitors every once in a while. But we now live in a world where I can pick up this thing and without being connected to any wires, speak live to somebody in video chat in Brazil or Slovenia instantaneously. Holy freaking crap! I mean, think about this. Somebody almost on the opposite side of the globe. And I can speak to them live with very little, if any, delay without even being connected to anything. Which means our society, our city or town that used to be just that little thing, is now how big? It's worldwide. So every society has to interact with every other society. It can't be, well, you guys go over there and live by yourselves and do things your way, and we're going to stay over here and do things our way. That doesn't exist anymore. You are inherently going to be rubbing up against those other societies all the time. Excellent point, Caden. Thank you very much. Okay, Logan, you were about to go.
All right, so if your ethics related to your work environment and then ethics related to your religion like collide, is it more of a like competition between like what you believe in and then like what you depend on? Like with a job, I mean, if it's your only job and you depend on it, are you going to go against those ethics or are you going to choose your religion?
Yeah. Okay, so a classic example. We live in Southeast Idaho. The LDS religion is a predominant religious organization in this area. Certain tenets of that faith say, for example, that alcohol is inappropriate and not to be partaken of. If the only job I can get is serving alcohol at a bar, that's a classic example. Am I doing something wrong by serving something that I'm not supposed to partake of? Or am I taking care of my family as long as I don't partake of it? Is it sinful or wrong or bad for me to give it to other people? It's a classic illustration of what you're talking about. It's tough. How do I decide? This is where we get into this. We're going to get into this deeper in the next couple of chapters. Okay? All right. So, Porter, Billy, Jackson, do you guys have anything you want to jump in on? Okay, folks, that's everything I've got for today. Again, I apologize for the disordered version of class that we had today. I will just strive my best to avoid this in the future. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. I will see you on Thursday.
That won't change what our discussion is for Thursday, right?
Nope.